Welcome. We're going to go ahead and start our meeting now. Welcome. This is the regular day meeting of the Boise City Council on Tuesday, June 28th. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Bajent.
Here.
Clegg.
Here.
Halliburton.
Here.
Sanchez.
Here.
Willits. Woodings.
Here.
All present.
Thank you. Item 2 on the agenda is a request for approval of the City Council minutes of June 14th.
Madam Mayor, I move that we approve the city council minutes from the work session and the regular evening meeting, but note that Councilmember Willits was remote for the work session on that work session minutes.
Second. Moved and seconded. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Clegg.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Sanchez.
Yes.
Willits.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent. All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. Next up is the consent agenda. And I believe we'll have a motion to remove, but let me go ahead and read this. All items with an asterisk are considered to be routine by the council and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or citizen so requests, in which case the item will be removed from the general order of business and considered in its normal sequence.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I move that we approve the consent agenda, but remove resolution 333-22 for separate consideration.
Second. Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Would the clerk please call the roll?
Clegg.
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Sanchez.
Yes.
Willits.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. So now before us is resolution 33322, a resolution expressing the city of Boise's commitment to common sense gun safety efforts.
Madam Mayor, I'd like to make a motion and then have some discussion on this resolution.
Sure.
I would move that we approve resolution 333-22.
Second. Moved and seconded. Discussion.
Madam Mayor, we removed this resolution at the request of several folks, citizens, folks on here up at the dais on city council, because I know that this has become an issue that so many people care so deeply about. Though while I was serving in the legislature removed the authority of cities to have any separate ordinances relating to gun control, including what we had at the time, which was the prohibition of carrying firearms in our parks, facilities, and on city streets. We felt that it was important to put forward a resolution calling on those who do have the authority to make changes to our laws to help with safety in our schools, safety in our churches, in our grocery stores. So just calling on those folks to, take this into account and do what they can for the safety of our citizens. So I appreciate the work of staff in crafting this resolution. And I thank everyone for their support.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
I think we do what we can and we try to show where we stand on these types of issues. And I think it's really important that we do that. I want to recognize one of the groups that are here, Moms Demand Action. Your meetings, once I got elected, didn't end up falling at the right time, but I used to attend the group quite regularly. And one of the reasons why I attended the group is because on a number of occasions, my life has been personally affected by gun violence in the form of suicide. And so I'm happy that when we created this resolution that we call that out, because Idaho is ranked 4th in the nation for gun violence involved in suicide. And that number is even higher when it comes to teens and young adults, especially young men. So this really is an issue that affects everybody across the state. And I think it's really important that we do show where we stand on this issue and make that call for action. So I appreciate the staff, our fellow council members, and Madam Mayor, of course, for bringing this forward and making sure that we have the opportunity to show where we stand.
Thank you.
Madam Mayor.
Yes.
Thank you. I too want to thank the mayor for bringing forward this resolution and my colleagues for supporting it as well. One of the issues that we've encountered, not just within our own community, but within this country is the inability to use federal monies to pay for studies that would show the adverse impact that guns have on our society. And recent legislation, it looks like, is going to address that and finally release those monies so that we can have in black and white the real costs, not only in lives, but in money, that these guns are the toll that they're taking it upon our community. And, I firmly believe that this increased love of gun over people has been about intimidating those members of our community who are not welcome to walk the streets with ginormous guns strapped to their bodies. And those would be people of color, women of color. It's difficult for me to believe that these gun rights laws are for everyone. They're not. They're for white people, specifically for white men. And as long as we keep making room for guns, we are supporting white supremacy in our country. And it's a shame that a state like Idaho has become synonymous with that kind of sentiment. And without real action, it's difficult to turn the tide. So I very much thank the mayor for bringing this forward because it's an opportunity for us to do what we can. And silence is agreement. Silence is acquiescence, and we cannot remain silent on these issues.
Thank you. Councilmember Willett.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Whittings, for taking this off the consent agenda. I do think it deserves discussion. I'll be voting no on the resolution for a couple of different reasons. I think we're elected to city council. We're not elected to Congress. We're not elected to the state legislature. Our job is to reduce crime, improve parks, improve housing, provide basic city services, do all the things that we talked about the last 5 hours when it comes to the budget. And this resolution will have no bearing on the operations of city government, except to, I think, make a statement that will have very little impact. In fact, this is a state and federal matter, and this resolution will have no bearing on policy. In fact, the president signed a bill 3 days ago. So with that, I'll be voting no.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, did you want to say something?
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. I wish I was there. The resolution, we're doing the resolution today because in many ways, this does impact city policy. As the Council President Pro Tem mentioned, it used to be that we could dictate whether or not guns could be in our zoo, in our buildings, in our parks. The resolution calls on those with power, because we don't, to protect our kids and the most vulnerable in our community against gun violence, to act to do that. And we're restricted by what we can do, but by acknowledging that there's a problem, acknowledging that we would like to see solutions, I believe we set ourselves on a path towards those solutions. We've seen firsthand in our community the impact of gun violence in the mall shooting right here last October. And the scars from that mall shooting remain and will always remain, even though at the same time we are healing by acknowledging the impact that that's had and acknowledging that we need solutions. Our most important job is to keep our community safe, public safety. And these issues impact public safety. We hold in very high regard the importance of keeping Boiseans safe. But we've also seen that the rise in gun violence isn't just a law enforcement matter, but as Councilmember Halliburton mentioned, rightly pointing out, it's a mental health matter. It's a public health imperative that we seek ways to address holistically with mental health services, with housing and other supports, stability at home, stability in the community, and connections to the community to improve mental health. I really am grateful that we've had the opportunity to bring this and to have this discussion today as a city, because it really does impact our own public safety when it comes to whether kids feel comfortable walking into the schools down the streets from our homes, whether retirees can go to grocery stores safely, or frankly, if we can enjoy an afternoon at the mall. We at the city are ready to work with the state and federal delegation, but particularly the state, because this is where that resides, to address these issues, to create an environment where Boiseans feel safe, and common sense solutions to some of this gun violence can be made proactively.
Thank you. I'd like to also chime in just briefly. I come from a little bit different generation than anyone else on this council. And I grew up in a time when I could go to school and not think about my safety at school. I grew up in a time when many of my friends carried pocket knives to school. Many of my friends had a shotgun in the back of their pickup at my high school, and no one thought anything about it. But it was also a time when guns were regulated in a much different way than they are today. And I happen to believe that that sensible regulation contributed to the safety I felt. I now have a dozen grandchildren, and they don't feel that safety. And I want to return to a country and a place and a time when my grandchildren can experience the same safety that I experienced growing up in this wonderful country. My father was a World War II veteran. When he got home from the war, he never owned a gun again the rest of his life. He had been an excellent marksman, a person who filled the dinner table before he left for the war. And after he came home, he determined that he didn't want guns to have a place in his life anymore, because he saw the worst of what guns could do and what they're designed to do, which is kill people. And so I am very much in support of this resolution that simply calls for sensible, thoughtful action to make this a safe country to live in again.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I think I might be the only firearm owner on the council, and I'm certainly by far the most avid one. It's a big part of my life, and it has been since I was a kid. There's a lot to talk about in a country where the one thing everyone should agree on is that children should be safe and deserve to live in a country that can't seem to do that, and that hasn't done it since I was in high school during the Columbine shooting, and we watch it on TV. The Supreme Court has just clarified what the Constitution means in terms of people's right to carry a firearm. And policymakers are going to have to sort through how to keep people safe and how to allow the Second Amendment to be exercised together at the same time. I didn't read this resolution as calling for any specific particular action or as taking a position on what is really a culture war issue at this point in our country. I read it as a request to have a reasonable, sane conversation about things that, again, everyone cares about, the safety and well-being of people. I have often said that I would voluntarily surrender some of my Second Amendment rights for the better of other people. We now know, as of last Thursday, that the Constitution doesn't require me to. And so we're going to have to sort through that as a country. What can we do within the confines of the law and within the confines of the rules the Supreme Court has made? Regardless of your views on firearms or on mental health or addiction or all these other social problems, it is reasonable to have the conversation, just to ask the questions and try to get a healthy dialogue as opposed to again, what's become a culture war. And I read this resolution as not taking any strong position on what specifically needs to happen, but as acknowledging that we need to talk about it. We need to talk about it and not fight over it. And we need to work from all areas of perspective on this. Mine being very different than my fellow council people, I think. to make progress. We haven't made it in 20 years, and these things keep happening. We can all do better. And so that's why I'll be supporting the resolution. And, notwithstanding my strong, deep, lifelong, and personal connection to firearms.
Would the clerk please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Willetts,
No.
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
5 in favor, 1 opposed, motion carries.
Thank you. That moves us to item 4, ordinances. We have 2 ordinances on the first reading calendar.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent that all ordinances on first reading be read by number and title only and filed for the second reading calendar.
Without objection.
ORD 31-22, an ordinance CAR 22-0001, Barrett Family LLC for property located at 11825 West Victory Road, annexing 2.1 acres of certain lands and territory situated in Ada County, Idaho, adjacent and contiguous to the corporate limits of the city of Boise City, establishing and determining the land use classification of said 2.1 acres as R-1C, single-family residential, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such annexation and zone change, directing the city engineer to lodge and file a legal description and map for said annexed lands and territory, providing that copies of this ordinance shall be filed with the Ada County Auditor, the Ada County Treasurer, the Ada County Assessor, the Ada County Recorder, and the Idaho State Tax Commission, providing that a copy of said legal descriptions and map of said annexed lands and territory be recorded with the Ada County Recorder and filed with the Ada County Assessor and the Idaho State Tax Commission as required by law, and providing an effective date. ORD 30-32-22, an ordinance CAR 22-0003 for property located at 8837 South Federal Way, amending zoning classifications of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance and adjacent rights of way from T-1D Technological Industrial Park with Design Review Zone to C-1D Neighborhood Commercial with Design Review Zone, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date.
Thank you. We have no ordinances on second reading, which takes us to the third reading calendar.
Madam Mayor, I move that further reading of ORD 29-22 be dispensed with and the record reflect it's been read a third time in full.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Sanchez.
Yes.
Willets.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries. Oh, yes, sorry. ORD 29-22. An ordinance CAR 21-00036 for property located at 2587 South Maple Grove Road, amending zoning classification of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance and adjacent right of way from R1A to R1C, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date.
Madam Mayor, I move that ORD 29-22 be approved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Sanchez.
Yes.
Willets.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Madam Mayor, I move that further reading of ORD 30-22 be dispensed with and the record reflect it's been read a third time in full.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton.
Yes.
Sanchez.
Yes.
Willets.
Yes.
Woodings.
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries. ORD 30-22, An ordinance CAR 21-0047 for property located at 2315 South Broadway Avenue, amending zoning classifications of the city of Boise City to change the classification of real property, particularly described in section 1 of this ordinance and adjacent rights of way from R1C, single family residential -8 units per acre to R-2D, medium density residential with design review -14.5 units per acre, setting forth a reasoned statement in support of such zone change and providing an effective date.
Madam Mayor, I move that ORD 30-22 be approved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Clegg,
Yes.
Halliburton,
Yes.
Sanchez,
Yes.
Willetts,
Yes.
Woodings,
Yes.
Bajent.
Yes.
All in favor, motion carries.
Thank you. That brings us to item 5, special business. First up on special business is the appointment of Robin Lockett to the Public Works Commission for a 4-year term ending June 2026.
Madam Mayor, I ask unanimous consent for the appointment of Robin Lockett to the Public Works Commission for a 4-year term ending June 2026.
Without objection, sorry. Is Robin here online, or she's not here in person, I don't
Yes,
believe?
actually, she is online.
Huh?
Madam Mayor, she is online.
Thank you. Robin, we'd love to hear from you. We always allow our appointees to talk.
Very good. Madam Mayor, members of the council, thank you for having me here today. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. My name is Robin Lockett, and I'm quite honored to have been selected for a seat on the Public Works Commission. The city's responsibilities related to our resources are at the heart of Boise and will shape our future as we grow. I am confident I will be an asset to the city as a member of the commission, helping ensure our actions are for the betterment of our community. Public service has always been a focus of my personal and professional life. I was born in Boise. I graduated from Boise High School. I volunteered with Habitat for Humanity International after graduating from college, and I serve on our neighborhood's association's board of directors. I worked for 14 years as nonpartisan staff at the Idaho legislature, and I currently work at the Office of the Attorney General. Though not an attorney, my division oversees the general administration and budget for the office. I look forward to providing recommendations on policy, providing leadership on budget and finance, and guidance on the range of responsibilities overseen by the Public Works Department. I will serve with integrity and vigor. Again, thank you for having me. I'm thrilled to begin working with you.
Thank you, Robin, and welcome aboard. It's really a pleasure. As I read your resume, was very impressed with your prior public service and your commitment. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I just want to say a couple of words as well. I got to know Robin when I was serving in the legislature. It's really great that she's chosen to step up and serve our city in this capacity. She's a very intelligent, she has a great mind, really thoughtful, and I think that she'll be a huge asset to the Public Works Commission. So thank you for taking this extra time for yet another volunteer opportunity, Robin. We're lucky to have you.
And thank you so much, Councilwoman Woodings. I really appreciate those kind words.
Whoops. I turned my microphone off and didn't realize it. With that, we'll go on to item 2 under special business, which is an update on the data analysis in the police department. We have Chief Lee and Alicia Records.
Madam Mayor, members of council, thank you very much for your time today. What I'd like to say is that I know when I was appointed as the chief of police just over 2 years ago, it was made very apparent that we wanted to grow our capacity and ability to really do data-driven policing, data transparency, and evidence-based policing models. And so there will be 2 presentations today, first from Alicia Records, and then secondly from Lieutenant Jim Quackenbush, talking about those items, the growth and development we've had in the department. Before I introduce Ms. Records, though, I would like to mention that Part of this has been a strategic realignment of resources in the department to increase the capacity. And frankly, some of it is also strategic moves in leadership. Ms. Records has recently taken over the role of supervising what was the crime analysis unit and is helping transition it into a strategic analytics team. And with that, I'll allow her to present sort of what was the state of our analytics capability when she came aboard, where it is now, and where we are projecting into the near future.
Thank you. Welcome. And I have to say, you have a perfect name for this job.
I frequently get confused with our records department. Yes. Hi, Madam Mayor, council members. Thank you for having me. I'm Alicia Records. As the chief said, I'm the interim crime analysis unit supervisor and also a project coordinator for the department. The chief asked me to join him today to provide an overview on the management of data and kind of help set the vision for the future of strategic analytics at our department. So what you see here on the screen today is an example of products of information that we've provided in the past. So if an officer came to us and asked for May traffic stats, we would compile that information specific to their request and then return it back to them in an email, usually showing a table or a map or however we could visualize or summarize that information for the customer. So a few examples on the left-hand side of the screen are how we've historically pulled the information. We have been limited in our capabilities of providing real-time information. So there's generally been a time lag when we respond to requests like that. Another example of that would be our year-end reporting on the right-hand side of the screen. You can see this is our January to December 2021 year-end report. In the very, very small text on the right-hand corner, upper right-hand corner is our completion date of when we were able to compile that information and present it back to the department. And that was February of 2022. So still kind of exemplifying that time lag of when we're able to pull information and get it back to the community or to our department for internal use. We've worked and continue to work with our partners, especially the data services team in IT, to continue to streamline our data. So we are very close to getting to real-time reporting and near real-time information at our fingertips. What's exciting about this is that we can do reporting like this. We can continue to give reports internal and external for use, but it won't be waiting for a request, pulling the information specific to that request, matching the needs of the customer, compiling it into a report, and then presenting it. It would be the click of a refresh and an export button and the report is made, which is super cool. So I know this screen is a little busy here. This is us. We are on the verge of having a dashboard like this available for internal use. This is screenshots today. It's an actual automated dashboard that we do have. I'm working on currently. It's a screenshot so I don't accidentally hover over real addresses and information. But I've been working closely. This is a project I've been working on closely with our neighborhood contact officers. They were able to provide the exact customizations that they were hoping to see specific to what they want to learn or know more about in their areas. So just to kind of walk through this report, we have at kind of the middle top is calls for services by month. So you have a bar graph showing your monthly trends. Below that is a time of day and day of week heat map of when our calls for services come into the department. And then on the right-hand side is kind of a heat map or a visualization of locations that calls for service come into our department across the city. So this is just allowing. Oh, and this is also based on certain call types or neighborhood call types that the officers were hoping to see since the beginning of the year. What's unique about this and different from what we've done in the past is that it allows officers access to information that's readily available all in one place, and it's updated every morning with the previous day's information. It may even offer information to the officer that they didn't know to ask for or provide comparisons they hadn't thought of. More importantly, for our supervisors, it may allow more visibility into where more resources or staffing may be needed because they can see it visually and it's at their fingertips. The key here is that we're offering self-service analytics to the people who need it most when they need it most. So walking through kind of an example of how an officer would use this dashboard, they could select a specific call type. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see you can navigate through different dates and different call types, and then up at the area is a selection for area. The visualization is all the same though. So for this example, I used vandalism calls for service types. And so this screenshot shows the entire city's calls for service related to vandalism. And then just kind of looking at this, you can see January through May, it shows a steady trend for vandalism calls for service. And then June, I pulled this report on Monday, so it gives us all the way up to Sunday. And we're about on track to stay consistent with our monthly reporting for June. This next view is an example of how an officer can drill down farther into their area of coverage. So right here, we're seeing the downtown area, otherwise known as Valley 2 or V2. This is similar to the previous slide. It allows the officer to see what's happening with vandalism calls for service in the downtown area. As you can see, kind of another example here, April has a lower number of calls for service compared to the other months. So this is a place where the officer or supervisor may be able to start analyzing the information more to determine why. Switching views a little bit here, because we're able to provide these self-service analytics, officers will have quick access to information and other charts like this one. And this one shows the number of reports written by officers per month. So as you can see, there was an increase in our number of reports written for vandalism in April. So combined with the low calls for service of vandalism in the previous view, the supervisor can now start to look at staffing for April and determine if we were the variable that led to the decrease in vandalism calls for service in that area, and then make future plans based off of that information. That's the kind of analysis that used to take us so much time. We had to pull every single piece of this information, match it to the request of the person that it was coming from, compile it into a report, assign a crime analysis unit member, and then get the information back. Here again, now the officer is going to have all of this information at their fingertips in near real time. I'd like to acknowledge again the data services team for all of the work that they did in cleaning and standardizing our data so that we could get to this point. This is a dashboard that's still in design phase. I'm hoping it'll be out on the roads for internal use shortly, very soon, along with a few others that are currently in testing and design phase as well. And this is just kind of a tee off. We're in high hopes for the future and what our capabilities will be able to do and continue to make more progress in data analytics and strategic analytics. The goal being here that we're using data to predict crime trends and put in measures to stop it so that we're being as proactive as we possibly can be. I know that was a very quick overview, so I'm happy to go through this dashboard on an individual basis if anyone wants to look at it further. But with that, I'm going to turn over to the chief.
Thank you. And while that dashboard was primarily presented towards calls for service, there's internal dashboards that examine issues such as officers' use of force relative to crime types, call load demands, things that can help us more effectively manage the limited resources we have. So part of what we're doing here is realigning, using data, using the information we have to be good fiscal stewards of the taxpayers' money, as well as more strategically invest in the areas that we need to effectively address the challenges that we see as a police department. If there's no questions at this time from council about this.
I have questions.
Councilmember Willits and then Council Pro Tem.
Thank you. I had a quick question about what's external and what's internal. It sounds like there's so much work that's gone into it. It's really fascinating. So what can the public see?
Councilmember Willits, Madam Mayor, members of council, part of the challenge is that we have an obligation to redact certain information, both from a ethical, legal standpoint, but then from a moral standpoint too. We don't necessarily want to draw a certain, say, street as a prime target for continued burglaries. So we have an obligation to sort of aggregate some of that data. The external views as we go through, we would ask for the wisdom and guidance of council of what, as representatives of the public, you're hearing the public wants to see. As we build those internal dashboards, we can build ones that are less distinct and discrete in the information, but still convey the trends so that the public can be informed without us inadvertently revealing information that might be sensitive from a legal standpoint or just, from a moral standpoint, we wouldn't want to present out there.
Mayor. Thank you, Chief Lee. I know that the timing of you coming in as our new chief of police and a lot of conversation around racially motivated policing those two things were happening very much at the same time. And I remember at that time, as we were talking about what kinds of data we would like to see out of Boise Police Department, a lot of that was traffic stops, use of force, and having more granular demographic, racial information on some of those types of calls. Is that still something that you're looking at implementing? Is that something that can be incorporated into this type of dashboard?
Council Pro Tem Woodings, Madam Mayor, members of council, those are things that we're looking at, but there are challenges with the data collection, the instruments, the venues from which we can pull the data. Some of those are joint shared services that would require all departments to agree to building a system that would collect certain types of data. Other ones, for example, say the traffic citations that are issued here, there's literally not a box to capture that data as it exists on the state form now. So even if we were to have an automated system, the information isn't captured. Some of the other internal dashboards we have, though, relative to racial demographics, we could extrapolate information on that, say for use of force more easily because it's an internally controlled collection instrument.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And this morning I saw that Ottawa Police put forward a report in the past week that kind of did some analysis on their calls for service and on some of their use of force and found some trends that are disturbing. And so I would really encourage, whatever way that we can make sure that we're serving our community to the best of our ability, doing the same kinds of things just as an auditory sort of function of the police department. Thank you.
And we will very much continue to develop that. That's part of why we want to be able to look at the data. And if none of the other council members have a question, that is a perfect tee up for the next part here. I'd like to invite Lieutenant Jim Quackenbush up to present to you. He has been doing graduate level research with our approval in conjunction with his master's degree at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He has specifically been looking into the Boise Police Department time commitment on calls relative to measures of satisfaction, particularly feeling that they're treated fair and procedurally just. And so we often, when we sit down and look at staffing related issues for the police department, we look at, do we have enough people to answer the call? But we're not necessarily always sitting down looking at, do we have enough people to answer the call the way the community is expecting us to provide the service? Lieutenant Quackenbush's research is very insightful into what the city of Boise expects from a time commitment, how much interface they want with an officer to feel satisfied. I will let Lieutenant Quackenbush speak to his research.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Lee. If you'll bear with me, I'm very scripted, but it's to help keep me on track. So bear with me and happy to answer questions and dive deeper, of course, toward the end. So good afternoon, council members, Madam Mayor, and our community members. My name is Jim Quackenbush, and I have the honor of serving the people of Boise as a lieutenant in the police department. I'm pleased to present the findings of a research project that we recently completed on satisfaction levels with Boise Police Department service. Before I begin, I need to acknowledge the assistance of our city legal team, specifically Kim Smith, our strategic services staff, the Boise Office of Community Engagement, and Director Weig, our PIO Haley Williams, and of course, Chief Lee for his vision on this particular project. The survey results I'm about to present speak volumes on the kind of service our community members feel they're receiving when they reach out for help. And so it's also most appropriate that I recognize the high level of professionalism and dedication that our Boise Police Department patrol officers demonstrate every day. Without their consistently strong performance, this feedback would certainly look much different. And I must also thank Dr. Christopher Cody, faculty at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's School of Government, for providing guidance in this endeavor. So to start out, I need to place this project in its proper context. As we're all familiar with, calls for police reform were ubiquitous across the United States in the aftermath of George Floyd's murder. In response, some cities reduced funding to police departments. However, Boise City added 17 positions and increased funding by $1 million, or approximately 1.7%. These policy decisions are important local matters, and we appreciate the importance of understanding what different communities want from their police. This study in particular examined how one of our most precious resources, not money, but time, might be connected to public satisfaction and perceptions of police officers' behavior. So I had two closely related research questions. First of all, how does the amount of time that Boise City police officers spend addressing a call for service affect community satisfaction levels? And secondly, how does the amount of time that Boise City police officers spend addressing a call for service affect community members' perception of procedurally just behavior? And I'll remind us of the tenets of procedural justice in just a moment, but first I'll outline the hypotheses that we developed after reviewing the literature on procedural justice, police legitimacy, and public satisfaction. First, that there was a positive and statistically significant relationship between the amount of time that Boise City police officers spend addressing a community member's concern and their reported level of satisfaction. And secondly, that there is a positive and statistically significant relationship between the amount of time that Boise City police officers spend addressing a community member's concern and their perception of procedurally just behavior. It's well established in the literature that fairness, which is something of a universal concept, is very critical to the public, and even more so than the important factors of outcome, efficiency, and even competence by public officials. Procedural justice emerged about 50 years ago to make this abstract idea that people just want a fair shake from their government representatives a little more tangible. When it comes to police, that means that folks want officers to be free from bias. They want them to be trustworthy. They want them to be empathetic, respectful, and to allow them the opportunity to be heard. Now, satisfaction, while closely related, is not quite synonymous with the idea of procedural justice. It's possible for people to agree that they were treated fairly and yet be unhappy with how things turned out. After all, the government can't always please everyone. I'm certain that I don't have to tell you folks this. My theory was that if officers were to effectively demonstrate procedurally just behavior, they would need to take more time with people than when they didn't. I also suspected that people would be less satisfied when officers spent less time addressing their concerns. Literature in the medical field supports this in physician, and patient interactions in particular, but until now we haven't looked at it in policing. Fortunately, the Police Community Interaction Survey, or the PCIS, was developed by Dr. Dennis Rosenbaum and his colleagues. The PCIS is both reliable and valid in examining procedurally just behavior by police officers and public satisfaction levels. It's been used in at least 53 different agencies in the United States to measure behaviors such as empathy, competence, and emotional control. In this study, I was able to measure satisfaction and procedurally just behavior using the PCIS. I was able to also measure time through monitoring systems such as computer-aided dispatch and automatic vehicle locator technology. So first, we built a sampling frame out of 38,381 calls for service to Boise Police between July 1st and December 31st, 2021. We then pulled data from the computer-aided dispatch system, which provided contact information and timestamps on when officers arrived and when they completed requests for service. We used systematic sampling, beginning with a random number and then a skip interval to choose specific calls. We then contacted individual callers. Professional interpreters were available for participants, and then the PCIS was also prepared in written form in English, Spanish, Swahili, and Arabic. After we made 323 contacts, we had 101 completed surveys for an overall response rate of about 33%. Respondents were generally representative of the Boise as a whole. As we're aware, Boise is a relatively homogeneous community in terms of race. It's about 88% white, according to the US Census Bureau, but it is extremely diverse in terms of age, income, and education levels. Census demographics were mirrored in the sample with only two exceptions. People that earned less than $50,000 annually were overrepresented in the sample by about 16%, and people earning over $100,000 annually were underrepresented in the sample by 11% compared to 2021 census estimates. Most of the PCIS uses a 4-point scale. As you can see here, the responses were overwhelmingly positive. Large majorities agreed that the officer answered my questions well, about 95%. I have confidence that my police department can do its job well. It's about 97%. all respondents reported that officers were polite, competent, seemed trustworthy, and did not behave in a discriminatory manner. In terms of overall satisfaction, 93% agreed with the statement, "The outcome I received was fair." Satisfaction score is a combination of responses to 32 related questions. A test revealed a statistically significant difference between the amount of time officers spent on calls where community members reported satisfaction and when they did not. Specifically, the average time spent on a call for service where reporting parties expressed satisfaction was just under 57 minutes. The average time spent on a call where reporting parties were dissatisfied was about 20 minutes. This particular result would occur due to random probability or chance about 7% of the time. Similar process we used for procedural justice score. This is an aggregate of responses to 11 related questions. Again, a test revealed a statistically significant difference between the amount of time officers spent on calls where community members reported procedurally just behavior and when they did not. Specifically, the average time spent on a call where a public member reported procedurally just behavior by officers was again just under 57 minutes. The average time spent on a call where procedurally just behavior by officers was not perceived was about 17 minutes. This particular result would occur due to chance about 0.03% of the time. Therefore, both of the hypotheses were supported. There is a statistically significant relationship between the amount of time that officers spent on calls for service and both public satisfaction and perceptions of procedurally just behavior by Boise City police officers. Now, of course, there are limitations to this study. Obviously, I administered the survey as a police employee, which could introduce some bias. Long-term influences such as the media were not considered as part of this. The survey responses didn't have a lot of contrast, as you saw, which could reduce our ability to do deeper analysis. And the survey focused purely on the opinions of calling parties. It didn't look at traffic stops or the perspectives of people that didn't have police interactions. And there's about 20% of the general public in a given year on average that have contact with the police. I will suggest, though, that the PCIS administration is a worthwhile pursuit in and of itself. It provides valuable feedback on our performance. It reinforces priorities and expectations to our line staff. The primary challenge with this study was that feedback was heavily skewed in a positive direction. There's evidence of a statistically significant relationship between the amount of time officers spend on calls and how people feel about it in Boise, but with your blessing, I ask that we take a deeper dive. Future work can test a larger sample or implement this design in another community. The results may help to provide further clarity on any connection between time, satisfaction, and procedural justice. Thank you all for your attention. I'm happy to now stand for questions.
Madam Mayor. It's kind of more of a compliment because one of the things that jumps out from that data would be the longer our officers spend with the public, the happier the public is, both in terms of satisfaction and how fair they perceive their government is. Well, that wouldn't be true if our officers were terrible, right? It would not be true if our officers were unempathetic or harsh or rude or whatever. So you only get to satisfaction and procedural justice an extended amount of time if it's high quality, talented, good people there for that period of time. So you're welcome to challenge that inference, but I think that is an implied compliment to all the men and women who work for our police department that just leaps off the page from this data.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you. Good point.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, go ahead.
I had a comment and a compliment. This is very, very helpful. Thank you for putting it together. I had the opportunity a couple of weeks ago to go on a ride along with the bike division downtown, and the officer that I was with had the most incredible people skills of any person I've ever met in my life. And his ability to communicate with people who were in deep trauma, living it every day. We basically spent the entire time talking with the homeless population in our city. It was one of the best things I've done on city council. It was a phenomenal experience. And I was so impressed with the people skills. And I think what this survey is saying is that when you have people with really good communication skills, the outcomes can be better.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Madam Mayor. Thank you so much, Lieutenant Quackenbush. That's really fascinating academic research. And it's it's wonderful to have folks like you in our police department who are pursuing education in such a relevant arena. It's just such an asset to our city. You had mentioned earlier that the survey was, you had interpreters, the survey was available in 4 different languages. How many responses did you receive from folks who are non-English speaking?
I would have to go back and look at the data. I don't have it right here in front of me. Something that we have to be careful about, and this goes back to what Chief Lee mentioned, is particularly with a small sample size like this, is potentially outing people. So for example, if we have somebody that identified as Black and they spoke Swahili in a sample of 100, it might indicate exactly who that person is. So that's another problem with the smaller sample size. The aggregated data, when you have much larger samples, can be a lot more helpful to those terms, but I'm absolutely happy to look at that and see what we can provide.
I was just curious, kind of like on a bulk numbers basis, like,
Sure.
Was it a few or?
It wasn't many, it was a
Okay.
handful,
Great.
just anecdotally.
Yeah.
The Latina population was pretty much exactly on point with what you would anticipate for in relation to the American Community Survey that the U.S. Census Bureau does every 4 years, I think it is, but I can't remember. I'm sorry. But the latest one, I think it's around 10 or 11%. And that was dead on point with this particular survey.
Great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm really excited about this. It's, when Chief Lee, when you first got hired, we talked a lot about what are the things that we could do that would potentially improve the service from the police department. And you were correct to say that we need to know more before we know what that is. And looks like we're a lot closer at this point than we were. I would note, we used to do a community survey that was statistically valid. I haven't talked to the administration about reviving that, although there's been conversations about doing it soon. I think Courtney just nodded her head. So potentially there's some of the things that were included in your survey. We always get a chance to add a few questions of our own. And I'm thinking that potentially this is a place that maybe we could get some statistically valid survey information based on the same things that you were asking.
Madam Mayor.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you for the presentation, for collecting all this information. It sounds like there's interest in collecting more and actually looking at a larger sample size. I think it'd be really interesting when we do that to see kind of 2 data points at the same time. So is time and age, going to be different for a younger population versus an older population, or is time and race, or time and, gender, or whatever it may be. And so I think that would be the other really interesting thing to pull from there, is that right now we're seeing that time has a large effect. And is that the same across the other data points as well? So if we're looking at a much larger group, and if we have the ability to map that data out, I think that would be kind of an interesting overlay to look at as well.
Thank you, Council Member Halliburton. That data is actually available in this data set. And so that would be a pretty easy look.
Yep.
But yeah, thank you.
Madam Mayor, thank you. Thank you so much for the presentation. I really do appreciate you sharing the demographics of our city. 88% of us are white. And I think that's important to take into consideration. If you haven't been brought up in society to fear police, if your image of police is Andy Griffith and Opie, and you call upon the police when you need them and they're there for you, it's very different when you come from a marginalized community and maybe the police are called on you. And so I just want us to take that into consideration as we think about the results of this limited study. I thank you for doing it. And as Councilman Halliburton suggested, I think it would be great to do a deeper look at this. But I also think it's responsible for us to remind ourselves where we live and what is the overall perception. I think we live in a city that is very pro-cop, pro-firefighter, and that's wonderful. But we also have to take into consideration the marginalized populations that live here as well.
Thank you, Councilmember Sanchez.
Madam Mayor.
Member Bajan.
It's either for the lieutenant or the chief. So 56.35 minutes was the breaking point where people were happy and felt they lived in a just society. What, maybe average is the wrong number, but across the city, how much time are our officers making public contacts on calls now? In other words, is 56 minutes, does it turn out to be a particularly long call? Is that right? Average is not the right way to do it because it could get all skewed, but like, you know, the bell curve, like you get what I'm asking. How much time are our officers spending out there?
Yes, Councilmember Bajan, thank you for that. It is pretty similar to average, the mean. So the data, again, in those data points that you saw is aggregated with all of this information together. So it actually represents a multitude of different underlying data constructs. But I mean, yes, to your point, you're talking about everything from a short car burglary report that maybe takes, 20 minutes up to, 8 hours that were spent investigating pretty serious crimes such as a shooting. So it is more or less an average. That is a pretty good way to put it. But there's definitely, again, that correlation between, in general, if officers are just taking 20 minutes with folks in general across the board, all of their factors keeping being under control or equal, you're more likely to be less happy than when they spend more time, which I think makes sense to most of us intuitively because it's about relationships and it's about having that engagement and really connecting with one another to feel that trust. So,
Madam Mayor.
If I may, Councilmember Bajan, I think to the heart of what your question was on average, are police officers able to spend, we'll just say 57 minutes for the sake of the conversation, are they able to spend about the 57 minutes on a call on average? And the answer is it really depends on the shift and the deployment, which is partly why this has clear implications to the way to staff the department to continue to provide the service that's expected, not just the minimum capabilities of answering the calls. And so that's partly why this data is interesting. It's partly why we need to examine the staffing models we use in the city to use the resources we have now, but also why we need to continue to project for growth in that exponential call load demand that I've talked about that is looming in the near future.
Madam Mayor, if I could follow up really quickly, because while we're on the subject, that was my next question, because you've talked about this curve, officer resource time, et cetera. In terms of refining this data in a way that would be useful, is the best thing to do to start looking at shifts, or is the best thing to do start looking at call types? Is it useful enough as it is if we treat 57 minutes as the average? My concern is we've got a data point here, kind of a well thought out, well researched, challenging one, but it's still a little clumsy for the purpose that we're talking about because it's so aggregated. Like, do we need to get better information in order to be able to use it to prevent the types of problems that you've shared with us in the past? And if so, what information do you need? Or is this good enough for us to make the kind of staffing decisions that we need to make to keep the community happy?
Councilmember Bajan, Madam Mayor, members of council, the data set that we have now, there's some strong inferences that we can draw from it that can help guide near-term decisions and help guide where we need additional research. Lieutenant Quackenbush is also at present drawing a sample from a particular shift, looking at it to make sure that the same sort of outcomes are being projected. The initial review of that data presents as if it will be the same. There are also at least 2 other colleagues from comparable sized cities, chiefs of police, that have a desire to have this research replicated in their communities so that we could also draw inferences that are to sort of the broader public. Obviously, what satisfies the time in one of their cities, what makes a citizen feel satisfied may be different, but it would help us understand a little bit call types and the similarities, which ones require more time. And so part of this is replicating the research outside to make sure that we're drawing the right conclusions, expanding the data set and continuing to replicate this, which is, I believe, mostly what Lieutenant Quackenbush is asking for your blessing in doing, council.
We certainly have mine. Thank you.
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
you.
Councilmember Sanchez.
thank you. I think there does need to be deeper study and more opportunity, I think, to hear from our public in maybe not so much of a regimented way, which I know is challenging, but the reason I say that is I had my own experience with the Boise Police Department about 20 or so years ago. I worked for the Girl Scouts, and I'd received funding to take newly enrolled Girl Scouts who came from rural parts of Idaho to a Mexican American Studies conference at Boise State. The ink was not yet dry on their membership into the Girl Scouts when I discovered that I had some escapees from the campus. And as you can imagine, I was horrified. You know, having other people's children under my care and having them leave campus, put themselves in danger. But it gets better. Half of them had found their way to a local store that sold condoms, where they proceeded to shoplift condoms. And the proprietor, of course, called the police, and they quickly alerted them that they were Girl Scouts. So this wonderful police officer by the name of Gary Weedman, I'm never going to forget his name, made sure that they got back to campus and took the extra step to recognize that these girls came from a rural part of Idaho. If they were to follow procedure, it would have involved calling their parents, who probably did not have the money for an unplanned trip 2.5 hours away from home. So he just made sure that they got back safely and made sure that he stood next to me as I read them all the riot act. And I'll never forget that experience, because I realized that this particular officer was taking these additional steps to be mindful of not just that the rules were followed. He could have followed procedure and taken them down and had all these parents have to come up to Boise to collect their children. But he didn't. He took those extra steps to recognize these are children who are coming from a low-income background, to be very thoughtful about the impact of what would happen if he followed the book. The children are safe. We got them on the bus, sent them back to their parents, and then I dealt with the consequences later. I would love to hear stories like that. I would love for our community to be able to share those types of experiences, because it would be very difficult. If you were to survey me, I don't know how I would convey that to you. And I think that's an important bit of information to know is, do we have those officers who are going to be thoughtful in the power that they have to impact our community members' lives? And in those cases, those folks weren't from Boise. They were visiting Boise, but they are Idahoans. And certainly their income level did impact how this situation was going to unfold. I would like opportunities for our community members to share those experiences if they have them.
Councilmember Sanchez, I appreciate that perspective. We'll look for opportunities to do it. I think very much so providing the amount of time necessary to get a procedurally just outcome isn't necessarily just one that's about process. Lieutenant Quackenbush will probably tell you I'm fond of saying process for process sake is nothing. The outcomes have to be in mind as we undertake them. I mean, there's plenty of things that are processed that are not good for us.
Well, thank you. It looks like we've exhausted the questions. I would remind council members that Amanda sent us both of the PowerPoints earlier in the day. So if you want to review any of the statistics, we have those. And thank you both. Thank you all three very much. This has been really informative.
Thank you, members of council.
With that, there's nothing else before the council.
Oh, Madam Mayor, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, Madam Mayor, for joining us. See you in 2 days.
Yep. Looking forward to being clear to be back in the office.
Thank you.
See you soon.